This is the last, third part of our discussion on unit versus integration tests. He will do a wrap-up, look for conclusions, and follow-up topics. Enjoy! Hi, welcome back. It was a nice discussion for us with Bart. We put our points. Now I would like to come up to a conclusion, what we saw, which points we have missed, and what will be the follow-ups soon. Bart, you had a point.
Yeah. So we were looking at the previous two discussions, and where I feel you were really focused on the value coverage part of testing, with the integration test linked to the value that's actually being delivered. I was more focusing on how the tests, besides that value capture function that they have, can also help guide your code design, and I think both are important. And the one angle that I haven't really addressed here, I mentioned it briefly, that's about edge cases. And when you look at logic, like essentially all logic is built up of a set of sub logical steps, and each of those single steps has its happy path, and it has edge and corner cases. So if you want to look at all the corner cases of the entire value chain, then the combinatorics of all those edge cases will end up with a lot of edge cases. And I think this is one of the valuable aspects of unit tests in a holistic testing strategy that we haven't addressed yet. And I think it's really important to push the extreme edge cases down to the unit level. So I agree that it's important to test the high value chain as close to the user as possible, but I also think it's important to push the edge cases down, because otherwise you're incurring too much cost to properly cover those edge cases. So that was, I think, the aspect that we haven't gotten to, that I do think are an important part of considering whether you should include more unit tests or integration tests.
My small question here. What do you call like edge cases? Is it more like exceptions and technical hiccups, or you would also consider edge cases from the functional point of view here?
Yeah, I think both. I think the lower you get in abstraction level, usually the more often you're guarding for developer mistake, which is also valid. But if you have a component in your value chain that guards against developer fault by failing early, which is a great idea, then I also really think it's valuable to have a unit test that guards the fact that you are guarding against developer mistake, and also documents that you are actually doing that, and that it's not a mistake that you're doing that.
Okay. I think it's good indeed to talk at some point about the goals and the values of the testing, because we will want to test, but why and how it works. I think it's also an interesting discussion.
Definitely.
And edge cases, that's for sure the question of the balance. What you do where. You probably don't want to get to some very specific case when you're doing end-to-end very high level test, especially because some of those cases will need very intrusive fixture or something, like you want an exception somewhere technical, or some state very weird somewhere. Yes, I agree absolutely on this. Yes,
sometimes it's almost impossible to create certain failure modes on a high level. Like, they happen in reality because weird things happen, but you can't reliably force weird things to happen. So sometimes you have to inject failure modes in a lower abstraction level.
Yes, I agree in general on this. And still, you can still go from top down or from down up, depending on your
Yeah.
strategy. But
Yeah.
yes, that's a very valid point. And I also agree that we have slightly focused in the goals, maybe. So for me, the design it's a secondary. It's a nice benefit, but that's not the most. That's not what I'm looking for. But okay, we can probably talk about this later. Yes, I think on my side, the observation is that we were mostly talking about the scope when we're talking about unit or integration tests, which actually makes some sense to me, but the technical things start to play here when I want to have something in between in the flow. I started to have more problem with well refactored unit tests when I started to embrace internal asynchronous processes with external queues, with databases in between, because then it started to complicate this setup with unit tests, at least in my experience. That's why I think one of the reasons I like integration tests is because they give me flexibility. I'm not restricted. I don't have to follow. I will always want to follow. And maybe that's I still have an open question. Maybe from the methodological point of view, how you're learning to program, how you work together with the team. Maybe it's good to focus, as you say, I don't know, on the unit test and refactorings around that. Maybe, but at the end product, for me, it's interesting more to be on the middle level. What I also find difficult is, independently on where they are coming from, top down or down up, is how to choose the proper level at the individual cases, because that's where also it becomes a little bit difficult. It becomes a little difficult because some members of the team prefer to have very clear guidelines, and then they want to say, just shall I put it here or here? And then my preference, okay, start here, or your preference start here. And that's where it might be a little bit different.
Okay, so yeah, indeed, it's a really good idea to have a discussion about what the goals are of unit tests and integration tests, because there are, I think, quite a lot of valid points to do automated testing in build pipelines and in development cycles, and not all of the valid reasons get the highlight they need, in my opinion. So let's definitely do that in the future. And to bring it to this balance that we have of bottom up or top down, I really think that it's important to do both, and I guess that is also where you come to. So what do you do where? And indeed, the clearer those guidelines are, the easier it is to understand, the easier it is to teach. But
it's not very easy to make them very clear, because it's very nuanced, I think, at least in my experience.
And something that is also entirely different to this, but I've been finding more and more that when things are hard in software engineering, that is actually a really good sign that you need to do more of it. Like, for example, there's this never-ending trope about how naming things is hard. Well, if it's hard to name things, if it's hard to name something, that's a really clear sign that the purpose of that abstraction that you're trying to name isn't well defined yet. So then doubling down on that naming, on that thing that is hard, will actually not only fix that problem of finding a name, it will actually fix that you find the right abstraction. And usually if you do that right, it means that you need several other abstractions. And I think that with unit tests, it's the same way. If it's hard to unit test, then it might be especially important to focus on getting it unit testable, because that will drive you to finding the better abstraction.
Yes, but the question is, how long will it be driving you, and will you have enough motivation? And that's what I think we will need to cover also in the following steps. Because yes, if the team or individuals find that that's important and they focus on that, eventually they will learn. They will be seeing that how it goes. But often what we see, there are many different priorities, and it's not to blame anyone. And tests, integration tests and tests, they often seen like a mechanical thing that you just add. And if you follow simple rules like mock everything, just lines of code coverage, then everybody should be happy, which is not necessarily the case. And I think my personal feeling is that the state of testing, developer testing, is not that high at the average throughout the industry. And I think that I would like to research in this area a little bit, like we're doing now, talking researching. Coming back to the goals, I think it's also good to, with the goals, to look at the values in the goals, because for different people there is a different value again. Some people are saying, yeah, I'm supposed to write these tests because they will catch my bugs. I don't think it's necessarily the case. It depends on the situation. For me, that's not the primary reason, for example. For you, your primary reason, one of the important drivers is the structure of the code. That's also good. But for me, for example, I don't really care that much about the structure of the code. I hope I can do it myself how I want to. But for me, the driving is slightly different. So that's we can also talk about. And maybe we can even come up with kind of a pyramid of the goals and the values. That's
so meta.
Yes, I like pyramid. Well, we can talk another day. Well, that's a little bit of the continuation how we structure our test pyramid. But maybe we can build another pyramid, replace this one with something else, and build another. Yeah. How about this deal?
So I think we agree there's lots of interesting things to talk about. But what do you think would be like the main takeaway from this discussion that we had about this subject?
An important takeaway is that we have both problems with the tests that impede or don't encourage good code structure, despite the TDD promises. We also identified some key reasons for that. Bad tests, basically. And there are bad tests on both low and the high level, and on the both levels they do a lot of harm. So on one area, if you're talking about low level, they add lots of friction. On the high level, well, basically everywhere is a friction. So I see lots of people very demotivated to write tests. Yeah. They say it's just a waste, they're just breaking, they're not giving any value. And I think that's because what do they expect and how they write most of the time.
Yeah, and I think that boils down to being considerate about your tests. Like add only doesn't work. Your tests are a direct reflection of your domain model, essentially. So whenever something changes about your service, your tests should change, and that means adding, removing, refactoring, just as much as it is your production code.
Yes. And another important thing, I guess, from this conversation is that we are just looking on the difficult balancing act. And then depending on where your recent experience or most of experience, you will be blaming the other side or this side. Well, blaming maybe a little bit strong, but in the non-very nuanced discussion, like, how do we need to write the test? Yes, no, you will say, okay, start here. I will start here because of our current perspective. But at the end, it's very nuanced. We will both, I think, in many cases, try to have this balance depending on the context.
And the fun thing is that your experience is actually a factor in this balance.
Of course, it is.
So that makes it a doubly confusing.
Yes.
All right, so that was the final part of our first episode. This was a total experiment, and we've enjoyed it a lot. We also really appreciate everyone's responses and feedback we got from colleagues and friends and everyone else. So we're definitely going to continue making more episodes.
Yes, and speaking about feedback, I got a very good question from one of my colleagues. Was our channel inspired by EastTDD Dead series from Mountain Fowler? Unfortunately not. It should have been, but I would really like to rewatch that conversation, and I would really recommend for everyone who is interested in this topic. Meanwhile, we are starting to work on our following episodes. The first will be about contract testing, and then After that, we will do about what makes a test good, a direct follow-up of this episode. And Bart, you told something about you have a conference engagement.
Yes, I got my first talk accepted in 2021. It's at Conf42, Chaos Engineering. It's February 25th, and it's all online due to COVID. So, and the lineup is looking amazing. So check it out. We'll also put a link in the description. So thanks everyone. Like and subscribe. That helps on YouTube. And we'll see you around.
See you.